Welcome to Crambox Politics Weekly, your go-to podcast for breaking down the latest in state and federal legislation. I'm Carl, a retired Marine and political enthusiast, here to help you stay informed and engaged.
And I'm Avery, an Army veteran, political enthusiast, and your co host on this journey. Together, we're here to unpack the policies and decisions shaping our lives one bill at a time.
Each week, we'll take you inside the halls of power to explore the stories behind the headlines, cutting through the noise to bring you clear, actionable updates.
Whether it's a bill that's just been introduced, a vote you need to know about, or legislation that's flying under the radar, we've got you covered.
So grab your Crambox and let's get started. Starting with the House of Representatives, it has been a very, very busy week in that chamber. The members of the House introduced a total of 257 pieces of legislation. Of those pieces of legislation, 226 were bills, 22 were simple resolutions just dealing with the House itself. Another 8 included joint resolutions that applied to the House and the Senate, and one was a concurrent resolution. And that was just a resolution dealing with the attendance to the inauguration, which it looks like that's going to get drastically cut now that the inauguration has moved indoors. In addition to introducing all those pieces of legislation, the House was able to come together and pass a total of 17 pieces of legislation. Many of those were bills. Some of those were simple resolutions, again, just dealing with the House, and the simple resolutions were passed by voice vote. What I really want to cover are two very specific controversial bills, H.R. 28 and H.R. 30. H.R. 28 is the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act of 2025. That act is a anti-trans, transphobic piece of legislation. Essentially, what it is it's prohibiting participation of trans women from being included in female sports on the false narrative that it is believed that trans women would have a far superior capability when it came to physical prowess and physical competition. Now, they reference a number of incidents, sports players who have been bottom tier as men in men competitions who then transition and then compete in the female competitions and win. But the reality is that the basis of their argumentation is false due to the fact that they justify it by saying that the transition process has no physical uh, impacts when it comes to men and women and trans men and trans women. When in reality, Avery, as you described in season one, that is not the case. We talked a little bit about this last week and just re-emphasizing the fact that this bill right here, which passed in the House with a 218 in favor to 206 against, is nothing but a piece of anti-trans legislation intended to target a minority group that in all actuality just wants to live their lives and continue to play the sports that they play closely or more closely aligns with their gender identity. My answer to this is fine, let's just make all sports unisex. And when you do that, all of a sudden the issue is null and void. Now, Nancy Mace, the author of this, says that this is protecting women and ending the Biden war on women, but all it is doing is orienting the war on the marginalized community of trans Americans here across our nation. The other one that I want to focus on is H.R. 30. Now, H.R. 30 is an anti immigration bill. The name of this bill is the Preventing Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act. Now, the important thing to note here about H.R. 30 is that H.R. 30 is just an addendum to the Immigration and Nationality Act. Essentially, what this bill does is it adds categories of criminal offenses to the Immigration and Nationality Act as it applies to who can and cannot come into the United States. It applies sex offenses and domestic violence, stalking, abuse, or a violation of protection orders as those things that prohibit or preclude an individual from being granted access to the United States, either on a temporary or permanent basis. It also goes into adding those same categories to the list of categories as they apply to deportation offenses as well. So if you get picked up and you're charged with one of the with a sexual related offense, or with an abusive related offense, or even with a domestic violence related offense, you can and will be deported from the United States. Now, this is all being passed under the guise of protecting women, right? The problem with this is that there is a law that is in place called VAWA. It's the Violence Against Women Act. And the VAWA essentially allows for individuals, or specifically women, who are coming into the United States to be able to claim sanctuary based on the fact that they are the victims of domestic violence. This act right here, HR 30, essentially overrides VAWA. And the way that it overrides VAWA is that it doesn't really provide any type of parameter for what it means to be accused of and or charged with a crime as far as domestic violence goes. So a woman who is defending herself against a violent partner or her violent husband and is then charged with a domestic battery or domestic assault case, that individual per HR 30 is no longer able to enter the United States and have a chance at becoming a citizen of the United States, thus overriding VAWA and completely eliminating its ability to provide for the protection of women who are the victims of domestic abuse and are trying to enter the United States in order to get away from their abusive partners. So HR 30 was passed in a lopsided victory, with 274 voting in favor and 145 voting against. Obviously, those 145 were Democrats, whereas the 274 was largely Republicans, and there were about 61 Democrats that voted for the bill as well. It's a good intention bill, but it's so overbroad, and the wording and the verbiage within the bill is so vague that it does have the potential to have unintended consequences down the road. Beyond that, this week was a very busy week on the committee side of things, with a number of the House committees coming together and having their initial organizational meetings, and a few committees did have some hearings. I'll tell you, the spiciest of the committee for the 119th session appears to be the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. That's largely because the individuals, specifically Nancy Mace, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Representative Babert, are all in that committee. In addition, they are being challenged by some fairly verbose Democrats who are on the committee as well. This is the committee that AOC was once a part of. We now have Representative Crockett, who is in that seat. They couldn't even get past their organizational meeting without throwing barbs across the aisle at one another. It was a very entertaining organizational meeting to watch. Now, let me tell you, these organizational meetings are very dry. There's a lot of going back and forth, a lot of attempts at making amendments. Some of these organizational meetings go fast, some go long time. The organizational meeting by the Oversight Committee went for about 4 hours, whereas the organizational meeting for the Veterans Affairs went for about 30 minutes. So it's just one of those things where each committee has its own different feel to it. The major hearings that we did see this week were the Oversight Committee's hearing on the stay-at-home federal workforce, where they discussed the issues associated with a federal workforce that works from home or works in remote areas. And the reality is that there are benefits and there are consequences to having a workforce that does not come into the office on a more consistent basis. And the reality is that the primary harm from this from the witnesses, the primary harm of a stay-at-home workforce is to the local community itself. The DC Metro is running at below capacity because people aren't going to work anymore. The local economy is being hurt because there aren't as many people wandering the streets and going out to eat in DC. So as a result of that, there are issues with regards to the economy itself. Now, a lot of the members of the committee on the Republican side did bring up, hey, how do we know they're working hard? Do we even know how many people are there? the only person that had the ability to respond to those questions, because he was the commissioner of the Social Security Administration during the time period that we actually saw an uptick in the stay-at-home federal workforce, was repetitively interrupted and prevented from actually answering the questions in a meaningful fashion. So, kind of set the tone for the way things are going to go in that committee. Over on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, they did have their first of several committee hearings with regards to the state of the nation's transportation system. Of note, the witnesses that were being questioned in that hearing, all of them had a tendency to speak out and speak about how there is a need for the federal government to bypass the state and make themselves available directly to the cities, because providing funding to the states results in the cities having to go beg, plead, and borrow from the states themselves in order to gain the funding that they need to improve the infrastructure within the cities. Now, I understand where the cities, because the number of witnesses were from the National Association of Cities. But the problem, uh, and I say that the problem a lot, but there is issue with the cities doing an end run around the state itself. And that issue is that it infringes and it bypasses the entire argument about states' rights versus federal rights. In reality, it is the state's right to dictate where funding goes within its state. And while Republicans like to always argue about states' rights when it comes to reproductive rights, when it comes to same-sex marriage, when it comes to voting rights, they will be the first on board to bypass the state if it means that they can get their fingers and their money into the cities so that they can control the cities themselves instead of the states. Another argument that came out was the argument about how the construction overruns were the result of plain and simple environmental impact assessments and a large bureaucracy, and how there's a need to rope that in. Another representative brought up the argument about eliminating the 80-20 rule. And for those of you who don't know about the 80-20 rule, the 80-20 rule is that the federal government has to invest 80% of its infrastructure investments in highways, roadways, surface streets. And then 20% of its budget can then go towards railways, which would explain a lot and kind of tie into why we still don't have a high speed rail system in the United States. And the reality is because the United States doesn't put much weight in its investment behind those. So the argument or the question to the witnesses was, should we get rid of that rule and enforce a rule that is more flexible, allowing us to invest in the proper infrastructure in the proper locations and have that ability to flex depending on where they're at. Then the thing that stuck out to me the most is that they were referencing the IIJA, and the IIJA was the infrastructure bill that was passed under President Trump during his first term. At no point did anyone in the hearing ever bring up any type of discussion as it applied to the Build Back Better Act that was passed under President Biden early on in his administration, despite the fact that there's plenty of money in the Build Back Better Act that has gone towards Republican districts and gone to fund infrastructure construction activities and construction efforts inside of Republican districts, much to the benefit of the Republicans, the Republican representatives and their constituents. The focus was entirely on the IJA and ensuring that the IJA would have the potential to be recertified come September 30th, which is when it expires, September 30th, 2026. But beyond that, the rest of the houses had just their typical organizational meetings. I anticipate that those things are going to pick up as we go forward. Next week, there's a number of bills that are on the docket. One of them, HR 471, is in line to be discussed without having to go through the proper procedures. but because it is in the hands of the House Judiciary, they will be having a committee hearing on that bill. Of course, Monday the House won't be in session in order to allow for their attendance to the presidential inauguration. And then on Wednesday, we have the House Homeland Security meeting. House Ways and Means is meeting to have a hearing about taxes. Judiciary is having a meeting to discuss immigration. Small Business is having their organizational meeting. And then Veterans Affairs is having their first hearing as it applies to putting veterans first in community care. Thursday, we have the House Natural Resources doing a whole bunch of legislative hearings on a number of bills that are in their docket. And then Veterans Affairs, again, on Thursday, will have another hearing applying to disability assistance and memorial affairs with a focus on veterans due process. And for some reason, I'm not sure why this belongs there, but veterans' Second Amendment rights. That's about it for the House. It should be an interesting week for sure next week. Always here to make sure that we keep an eye on them. Avery, what was your experience over on the Senate side?
They sit around and they stare at each other more than anything. And I feel sorry for their aides because as you're watching them, they just sit there on the dais and they just sit there and sit there and sit there. And I feel bad for them because that's literally all they do all day. They're just like twiddling their thumbs and just talking like it's just, and it's literally what they do all day long, it seems. They did introduce some bills. They had 78 bills come through that they were introduced anyway. They did have 8 simple resolutions, 2 concurrent resolutions. The only thing that was like big, huge, important that they hit on and hit on and hit on, which still they didn't get too much, was the SB 5. That is the Lincoln Riley Act. They finally kicked it up to where we're looking for an actual vote next week. Hopefully, they just kind of sat on it and sat on it, and they tried to put a few amendments in. Like you said, everything was pretty much vague, all the wording. So what they're trying to do is reword some things. Amendment 23 was brought up and it did not pass, but Amendment 14 was brought up and it did pass. Like I said, nothing too terribly bad, just that's rewarding, trying to make it more intentional in their wording as opposed to vague. The main important things that happened were the confirmation hearings. They went on for hours. We're talking 3 to 4 to even 5 hours, where they just sat there and they got hit on. Hey, what do you want to do here? What do you think of this? How do you think this went? What was interesting was when they first sat down, they kind of verbally gave everyone their resume. It was interesting. Some people I knew, some people I didn't know, some people I was really looking forward to, and some people I'm like, I don't know who you are, but we're gonna kind of listen, but you're not that important. I have other people here that are more important that I'm gonna kind of watch, and I kind of spent all week just kind of playing roundabout with the table. I'm gonna watch this here. I'm gonna watch this here. Oh crap! I got another one here because they lined them all up at the same time. It was ridiculous. Hegseth was the first one up. He's going for second defense, and I don't like him. I think he's an arrogant douchebag. I have reasons why I think he's an arrogant douchebag, and this is my opinion and my opinion only. I can't speak for Carl or Crane Box Politics necessarily at a whole, but for me, he's an asshole. He's a douchebag. He's going to get passed through anyway. But the reason why I feel like he is a douchebag is because he has put on this charade of, yeah, I think women are good to be in combat now, when before he was completely against women being in combat. Women didn't even really belong in the military to begin with. They could be secretaries, or they could be moms. They could do this, they could do that, but they could not be in the military. They could not be in a war zone, and that is bullshit. Absolute bullshit. There are plenty of women who can do a lot of jobs better. And what's interesting is there have been women directly in the line of combat. And what happened is, yeah, they couldn't necessarily, throw a 300-pound guy on their back and get him out of there, but they could fit through the hole to open the gate that they needed to get into to get where they needed to go. Big guy couldn't do that. So you have to use your tools in a smart fashion. So I totally disagree with his women shouldn't be in combat, shouldn't be in the military bullshit. Obviously, as we know, he's got a thing against LGBT members. That's like kicking a dead horse at this point. We know how I feel about it. We know how things are going with that. Two issues other than the women in combat were the fact that he has a huge issue with drinking. So much so that he had to promise members of the GOP that he would not drink if he was confirmed. He literally had to promise to not drink at all if he is confirmed. That is an issue. If you have a drinking issue that bad, maybe you should not be there. You should not do that job. Same thing with the to go along with the drinking is the fact that he had several allegations of sexual harassment. I think there was even an allegation of sexual assault, if I am remembering correctly. But I know for a fact there were so many allegations, and it's usually when he's been drinking, and it's usually his subordinates, and that is an issue. You should not be their boss and harass them. That is a terrible workplace environment. It's not safe. You want to talk about making things safe for women and all these acts that they're throwing up, but they want to put this dude in there. Come on, that is an issue. It is a problem. It's disgusting. I'm not even gonna go. I'm not even gonna hit it anymore. Like it's another one that was really major was Pam Bondi. She, I wanted to I want to give everybody except for Hegseth a chance. Like I really can't stand Hegseth that much, but I want to try to give them a chance. And I was willing for the most part be like, all right, let's do this. She's been, you know, the AG for Florida, no issues. Let's go there. But then it was, well, Trump was, what this was a political circus. The AG was used for that, and we're not going to do that now. Like that's ending. He shouldn't have been, just attacked the way he was, and maybe, and she was basically just poor Trump. And to me, that's you're just going to fall in line. You're going to do exactly what Trump wants you to do. Say what he wants you to say. You're gonna go after whoever he says you're going to go after. And that's not what's supposed to happen. But as we've seen, as we've told you guys, that's what's going to happen. There's going to be Trump's revenge. That's what I've literally called it. That's what I'm going to continue to call it. Trump's revenge. And we've already seen pardons from Biden, which mainly his son, because they didn't want, he didn't want them to go after his son some more. We're looking at pardons from Trump for the Jan Sixers, and she was willing to throw out pardons. She threw up the fact that she was going to go a case by case basis. I mean, what are you really going to go case by case? There was like several thousand. That's going to take you all day. You personally are not going to go case by case like you said you would. And he's going to just say, let's throw out and pardon all of them. And you have people who were physically assaulting police officers. The police officers died because of this. You cannot just pardon everybody. It shouldn't, one, it shouldn't have happened. And two, if you're so pro cop and pro, we're gonna back the blue. Why are they assaulting police officers? Why are they killing police officers? And how can you stand there and say that you're for justice and following the law if you're gonna just pardon the people who break the law? It's not acceptable. It shouldn't be there. Another one I would like to say is Marco Rubio. He has a bipartisan approval, so to speak. Of course, the Republican side, they're going to punch through as many of these as they can. Anybody that's going to go yay yay Trump, Marco Rubio, he's not necessarily a yes man. He might be one of the only ones that will stand up and say, no, this is not what we're going to do. This is not the law. This is not how it's supposed to be. I don't know. He's kind of a wild card. I want to say he's going to be interesting. Another one that I want to go into talks about, and I'm really going to hit this one a little hard. Well, I'm not really hard, but I ended up getting some tidbit while you were talking, Carl. And I want to hit that for a second after I talk about her. Christy Nome is going for Secretary of Homeland Security, and she was, hammered about her how she sees the immigration policies and basically Homeland Security. Like, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? I didn't mind her too terribly bad. I liked her better than Cakestiff, obviously. So she is from Iowa. She grew up on a farm. She's willing to look at and consider the migrants who work on everybody's farm, well, the farm, so that we have produce that are still coming. So that was good, and that was great. We at least had some, hey, I'm willing, let's see what we can come up with. My The best thing I had about her that I liked, well, it wasn't that I had, but the best thing that I liked about her was that she was for transparency. That's what she hit that hard, and she made sure that everyone knew that that, and it can be that she just wanted the job, which I mean they all do, and will say whatever. But I honestly think that she might be transparent, or at least better than what we've seen from his first presidency. She wants to be transparent. She wants to look at all the law and let people, like, I want to know what you're doing. I want to see these things. What can we do better? What can we do differently? But she still might end up being a yes man. And I wanted to bring her up because according to the, and we like to keep people informed as soon as we can. According to the Wall Street Journal, it is now being reported that Trump wants to start deportations as soon as Tuesday. And from what I have read and understood, is that Chicago is going to be the first city that they are going to target. They are sending 100 to 200 officers there ahead of time, and it's going to be a large scale raid of the city, and it's going to happen all week. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carl. Isn't that one of the sanctuary cities, or something, one of the ones known as a sanctuary city? Because I know that was part of their thinking, is which city they were going to hit, and basically as a, hey, we mean business. It's one of those, you're going to be used as an example. And it's crazy. It's crazy to think about. And not really, is they're going to target Trump, or, well, Chicago. Trump Towers there's Chicago right there, so he could sit up there in his little tower if he really wanted to and watch all this transpire. Will he really do that? Probably not sit there. But this is what's saying is what's going to happen. This is what we've reported on again and again and again, that we are going to see mass deportations. He said the first day. Apparently, it's going to be the day after, but they've had to switch some things up. DC, because it's going to be cold. Other than some more confirmation hearings next week, that's the main kicker is we're going to watch Trump and his victory parade and be there for everything. They want to try to have confirmation hearings, and or at least a vote on Monday for Nome and Rubio, and I think Bondi. I think Bondi was the third name that I heard. So they're trying to get people pushed in as quickly as possible. All we can do is just keep you informed and keep watching. I'm gonna pull it back over to Carl. Carl's got some stuff. He's smart. He knows what he's doing.
I, I like to think that I'm smart, anyways.
You know,
Yeah, so it
Jesus.
sounds
But
like it's been a busy week for you over there.
oh my god, it just won't stop.
Yeah, it's going to be another busy week for you next week too.
Oh my god, there's so many confirmation hearings again. It's just nonstop.
I
But
mean,
you know,
eventually they'll get to a like a spring break, and we'll be able to take a pause.
oh my goodness. But you know, at least your side seemed like they pushed some bills through. Mine, they just sat around and stared at each other. I
Hmm.
swear to God, that's all they did. It was so, and we didn't even have any real cat fights. I mean, Bondi, you know, she kind of had a spat with Schiff a little bit, and you know, she was sitting there. I'm not going to be bullied, but we didn't have like Crockett and Mace level. That was
Yeah,
pretty
that
epic.
was
I like that one.
goodness. The the We can take this outside if you want to comment. That it
Oh
just
my god!
it
My
was
fa-
ridiculous.
my favorite part was the fact that the resigning officer was like, "Yeah, we're not gonna strike that because that's not violent. She didn't mean it in violence." And you hear Mace in the background going, "Yeah, I wasn't meaning it in violence. I said we could just go outside and talk." No,
Hmm.
that's not what that means.
Yeah,
That's
we know what "let's go outside" means,
you
and it
gonna
was
catch
all
them
a result.
hands,
It was literally all the result of Crockett saying "child." Like,
child.
I mean, all she was doing, it wasn't even child. It was child. Like, you know how like some Southerners will be like, "Woo,
Right,
child."
right, right.
Like, she wasn't referring to Mace as a child. All she was doing was reverting back to her colloquial language. Like that. That's what people say. And for
And
Mace
that's
to
not,
get bent out of shape out of that.
and she's from Texas. Like Crockett is from Texas. So yeah, you know, and what's crazy is like the video that I saw that you shared with me, she didn't even say Mace's name. She, you know, she just started, you know, talking. In fact, a Democrat had passed over her time to Crockett, you know, the
Hmm.
remainder of her time. So it wasn't like she spoke right after Mace, you know. So the
Yeah.
fact that she just took offense to it, man.
Yeah, and for context, the whole thing came up because Crockett had introduced an amendment to the rules reestablishing the subcommittee on equal rights, right? Like on equality and affirmative action. Like that's all that was. It had nothing to do with anything other than Crockett's attempt to reestablish a committee that had gone away and had been replaced by this wonderful committee called Doge that is
Oh
being
god.
headed by none other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, who took every opportunity and continues to take every opportunity to be like, the committee that I'm heading. And I'm like, bro, like,
They only
you're
put you
so
there
full
so
of
they didn't
yourself and
have
saying
to
funny.
so they didn't have to actually deal with you. God.
Oh gosh, it's an interesting one to say the least, and I have noticed that the level of decorum um, is is much higher in the Senate than it is in the House. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that one. I'm really excited to actually have something that's spicy and entertaining and something I can grab my popcorn and sit here and just for hours watch as they go back and forth. Um,
At least you have that. Mine just sit and stare, or they just sit and just talk, or you know, it's
yeah.
not like I know you caught it. You're like, wow, they really are just. I was like, yeah, for
Hmm.
hours it'll be like that. It's
Yeah.
so much wasted. Anyway, so while we're talking about legislation stuff, did you find anything interesting about any of the states?
We found a lot of legislation coming out of the states when it came to reproductive rights, because naturally now that we have the federal government that is dominated by the conservative of the American population, there's been a lot of things that came out, and I'm going to start off with Oklahoma. Oklahoma has introduced an abortion ban, but the significant thing here is that in this abortion ban, they are allowing for the use of the abortion drug, be it chemical or be it the misoprostol or the misoprostol. You'll have to forgive me for destroying those words. Essentially, it allows for that use by women who are or who believe that they might be pregnant. Now, the allowance is only up to the time which, by the law, the time which a typical medical procedure can be done to determine pregnancy, which, based off of my research, and I could be wrong, and listeners, if I'm wrong, please email us and let me know so that I can make corrections later on in another episode. But based on my research, it looks like the use of such drug related abortions is 10 days post conception. What that means is that up to 10 days after having intercourse, there's no way to really test to determine if you're pregnant or not
I
on the
mean,
medical side of things.
that kind of reminds me of using the almost like a Plan B drug, but this is
Hmm.
the plan. No, Plan B was only for the what 72 hours, 48, 72 hours, something like that. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, it's nice that they have an option to go a little bit further because we've all had those nights where we're drunk and you know some things have been done and you
Hmm.
can't remember if you use protection or not. So at least they're thrown out a life raft. I like that.
Well, you call it a life raft. I call it a ploy. And I say that
I
it's a ploy
mean,
because it's part of the long game, right? Now, Republicans
right.
have consistently said that women are using abortion as a method of contraception. And so what they're trying to argue is that when women get an abortion, they're getting an abortion because, well, they forgot to wrap it up or they forgot to take the pill, and therefore this is the next best thing. And so what this does is it forces women to use these types of drugs as a method of contraception. And as such, they're able to demonstrate, hey, look, women are doing this. We have the proof now. So now we can go ahead and get rid of this drug. Um, Now, the other significant thing about that is with this abortion ban is that it is essentially establishing that anyone who tries to perform an abortion um, is can be found guilty of a felony that is punishable by $100,000 fine and confinement.
Yeah,
That
not a life
confinement,
raft.
right? No, it's not.
No, no,
No,
no.
no.
I take that
It's
back.
important. Importantly, right in here, they did say that the woman can't be charged, right? Only the doctor.
I mean,
But it, so it uses the definitions of abortion and unborn child from Title 63 of Oklahoma statute in order to allow for them to get around the need to, in this bill, define what an abortion and unborn child is. Um, Looking at Tennessee has been going really extreme here, right? So they introduced their legislative body introduced a resolution to change its constitution. And in this Constitution, it says that a person shall not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall a person be denied equal protection of the laws. Doesn't seem too bad, right? But it goes on to say, as used in this section, person includes every human being from fertilization, conception, to natural death. So essentially, what this is establishing in the Tennessee Constitution is this notion that there is a thing called fetal personhood, and that a person begins to become a person once the egg and the spermatozoa meet up and become fertilized. Essentially, ending any type of argument for why abortion should be allowed because per their constitution you're a person the minute that that happens. So at that point you cannot be deprived of life, i.e. abortion, without due process of law, and you can't have due process of law if you're still in the womb. Therefore you can't have an abortion because it then becomes murder. In addition to that, the Tennessee, and I'm going to get to another state that is doing the same process, but Tennessee, and folks, we told you about this. I wrote this in my most recent blog about Comstock, um, and the potential for Comstock to come roaring back. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Tennessee is bringing the Comstock Act roaring back.
I
It
mean,
actually cites the Comstock Act, which is known as 18 USC subsection 1461, in its definitions as it applies to why it's going to enforce the new rule that it's going to enforce. And that is by establishing that anyone who has or that anyone who tries to mail or or carry any type of abortion drug across state lines is punishable by a felony under 18 USC subsection 1461 or the Comstock Act. So essentially what Tennessee is doing is they are setting up the process for this law to get challenged so that it can go all the way to the Supreme Court and get upheld by the Supreme Court, because Comstock is still a law that is on the books. And ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't stop at abortion drugs, right? So Comstock applies to everything that is considered lewd or lascivious, right? Guess what? If you watch porn, ladies and gentlemen, they're coming for your porn.
it's already at
Um,
the Supreme Court, by the way.
yeah,
Porn
the porn is already at the Supreme Court.
from
Uh, but
Florida.
but this is a different approach. This is a different attack, right? So under Tennessee law, if you are caught with these drugs, you will be punishable for the transportation and trafficking of abortion-related materials under 18 USC subsection 1461. Over in Kentucky, Kentucky is doing some amazing things as well. Both their House and the Senate have introduced bills that are roughly the same. Um, and when it comes to the Kentucky bills, essentially what they're doing is they're defining what abortions are legal and what abortions are not, and they're defining what qualifies as a legal abortion. Um, and Avery, you and I were talking about this earlier, but what I saw here and what you saw, I think were two different things, right? You saw this as Kentucky kind of softening up their approach as far as abortion goes, whereas I see this more as them establishing or seeing what happened when they established their total ban and seeing the pushback that they got from the people of their state as it applies to doctors who were unwilling or unable to conduct abortion like procedures in order to save the life of the mother, resulting in deaths. And we've got those deaths in the blog that I wrote, the blog post that I wrote at the beginning of this year. Um, uh, those deaths are significant just because of the way that the anti-abortion laws were written. And so what I
It
see is this. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You had asked how I had kind of viewed it. So I didn't necessarily see it as softening. I did see that, it was a way for them to be like, oh, people kind of aren't really liking us for like this. But I also found it was kind of interesting coming from Kentucky, and McConnell's from Kentucky, and it's part of the South. So I'm sorry, but yeah, that's how I saw it. I bet.
Well, and you're right. It is interesting based off of where it's coming from, right? But I think what this is this is a, and it's interesting you bring up McConnell because he's a really shrewd politician, right? And
He
so the
is.
way that I see this is playing the long game. This is it's establishing a way for the state to be like, hey, listen, we are against abortion, but is a list of all the medical things that apply for doctors to be able to have their asses covered so that they can actually provide abortion type procedures without having to fear for their revocation of their license. So they're opening it up without really truly opening up the access to abortion care, that states like New York and California and Washington and Oregon have. So I think that this is just one of those things. It's a political long game. It's an effort to divert attention away and make it seem like there was a win, when in reality, I think Kentucky is still maintaining their hardline stance when it comes to abortion, just because of the way that it opens up the process, right? It talks to how everyone is entitled to life. So again, Kentucky. Um, Indiana, that other state that I was talking about, that discusses the Comstock Act. Now, Indiana doesn't directly reference the Comstock Act, but they do prohibit anyone from knowingly or intentionally prescribing or possessing an abortion-inducing drug or sending an abortion-inducing drug to a person located in Indiana if the person located in Indiana possesses the abortion-inducing drug. It provides that each offense is a Class A misdemeanor with a Level 6 felony for subsequent offenses. So, bottom line, it is extremely anti transportation of the prescription drugs. But something that really stuck out to me is that this law requires that a woman who is pregnant as a result of rape or incest to provide her physician an affidavit attesting to the rape or incest before the physician performs the abortion. So it allows for an abortion as it applies to rape or incest, but the woman has to relive it in writing an affidavit and then give it to her doctor before the doctor can perform the abortion. And for anyone that has been a victim of rape, they know that that is the last thing that they want to do. It's the reason why we have such issues tracking down rapists. It's because the victims don't want to relive it. It's so traumatic that they don't want to go through that process.
Well, I
So,
mean,
by law, requiring an affidavit, like, what are we doing here?
even if victims do come up, they're basically victim shamed. They are attacked. So what's the point of coming forward? And now, like you said, they're having to relive it. But you're literally taking their worst day of their life and making them feel judged when they already feel judged as it is.
Mhm.
It's disgusting. You're right.
Um, in addition to that, Indiana passed another bill, Senate Bill 275. And in this bill, the abortion clinics are allowed to be recertified and granted their licenses back. But it also states that there are only certain types of abortion that can be conducted. And one of those abortions that cannot be conducted is what's called a D&E, or what Indiana describes as a process in which a um, well, I lost it. Give me a second. I'll come back. It does allow for abortions up to 20 weeks, but it prevents the type of abortion which is called a D&E. And D&Es are typically conducted in the second trimester of the pregnancy. And essentially, the way that it works, and I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but they go in and the fetus is killed, and then the fetus is then taken out limb from limb or dismembered and then removed. It's a safer method of conducting an abortion in the second trimester. And if abortions are allowed up to the second trimester, then that's the way that they go. There is another one, which is a DNC, and The DNC is essentially where they go in and they just take the entire sac out. But those are only done during the first trimester, largely because of the fact that the sac is small enough to come out. Um, but long story short, Indiana is doing a number of things. One, they're making it illegal to have any type of drug related abortion, which is the safest method of abortion. But the second piece is that they are restricting the types of abortion even further by eliminating safe methods, and we will likely see a rise in maternal mortality rates in that state as a result of those efforts. Um, that's it for the negative stuff. Avery, what do you think?
Lots of negative. I mean, there have been some good things though. I remember telling you about Missouri's SB 241. That basically
Yeah,
goes
that's your
through.
state, isn't it?
Fuck. For finally, we're doing something right. But I mean, we just voted for the amendment to go through where it put abortion back in the state. And let me tell
Mm-hmm.
you, it was a long, hard fight win. And basically, all this does is repealing all those provisions that were put in um, with the law related to abortion. So, I mean, I, there's your good story of the week.
Yeah, I
Home
mean,
run.
do you think that that's going to make it harder for any type of relapse in the future if they to go through and repeal all these measures now?
I mean, I know that uh, Missouri is already trying to um, basically take back the will of the voter. They were hardcore. Well, maybe this and maybe and they're like, no, no, no. We voted for these things, and like I said, um, the women and the men who actually respect and cherish what their what the females in the state really want and deserve.
Mm-hmm.
They were the amount of signatures were like double to triple what they needed to get, and the voter turnout just for this was astounding. So I can't say enough good things about.
Well, that's
And
good. I mean, that
and
that is that a good news story, right?
right.
100%. Um, Now California, my old home state, um,
Oh,
California is doing something interesting when it comes to abortion, and I actually kind of like this, right? So they're actually pushing to amend their constitution, um, and the way that they're wording it is a really interesting way of wording it. The way that they're wording it is a really interesting way of wording it. And the reason I say that is because typically the arguments coming from the conservative Republican side is that Democrats Democrats are primarily big government, government in your business, government telling you what to do, government telling you how to live your life. They want the government to be part of your life 100%, right? And Republicans are more of the small government. Government needs to butt out. Government needs to stay out of my business. Government needs to not do this. As you saw in all of the negative news that we just posted, or just as you saw in all the negative legislation that we just talked about when it comes to abortion rights, every single one of those was a Republican sponsored bill in a Republican dominated state, and each and every single one of those bills requires and mandates that the government gets involved in the decision making process as far as it relates to the medical decision making process between a female, a woman, and her doctor.
I mean,
Republicans are pushing the government to be involved. I'm
that's
sorry,
what we
Avery,
saw
go ahead.
last. I was going to say that's what we saw last week too. When we talked about
Hmm.
all the anti-trans, it is literally the government is trying to shove things down your throat.
Yep.
I don't know.
Now, what California is doing is their wording, right? And this is Assembly Bill 45. Their wording very clearly states the state is prohibited from denying or interfering with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, including their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion.
Say that again for the people in the back.
The state is prohibited from denying, prohibited, folks. The state is prohibited. This is a democratically pushed bill. This is backed by a Democrat. It is introduced by a Democrat. The Democrats are trying to pull the government out of your lives. Like I pause for emphasis here. But we keep doing this thing where we go round and round and round and round, and we keep talking about how there is this need for government to stay out of our lives. Like there is a spot for the government. We talked about the hearings over on the House side, and how there's a desire to have the federal government come down and interact directly with the cities outside of the states. Last week we talked about Idaho and its desire to supplant same-sex marriage because Idaho felt that it was an overreach of the Supreme Court. And yet we consistently see a situation where Republicans are pushing government to do what Republicans want you to do because
Same,
they want to mandate how you live your life.
same thing can be said about the porn industry. Came from Florida. It's in the Supreme Court being judged. It was a Republican led whole thing. It, you know, it, I,
The
I don't know.
majority of the states now have a situation where Pornhub is completely banned
Absolutely.
and or restricted.
And it deals with like California privacy. What you do in your own home, privacy. That's what their whole argument is. Everywhere is, well, what you do in your own. I'm just saying.
So at the end of the day, folks, like all I can say is California it does some crazy things. I'm
Absolutely,
not gonna lie to you. They do some really crazy things.
it's like some
Um,
Florida man shit. I'm not gonna lie.
they pass some outrageous laws, right?
Oh,
Like the law that they're trying to push right now about, or that they did pass, that applies to the elimination of the sale of gas vehicles in the state of California by, I think it
stupid,
was 2035, right? Like
stupid.
what? It's one of those things. Like I drive an electric car. We are nowhere near ready for like that level
Listen,
of
I got my gas guzzling F-150. All right, and you're gonna have to pry it out of my cold dead hands.
um it, it it's just they do some weird things, but I think this is one of the things that they have done right, and and it shows just how much the way that things have changed. Right, there was a time where I would have agreed with every single one of the individuals who says that Democrats are big government, Republicans are small government. I think that what we are seeing is a dynamic shift in which the Democrats are saying the government should not be involved in your life, and Republicans are saying you're going to do this because we are Christians and it's the Christian thing to do. Therefore, the government is going to tell you what to do and how to live your life.
And we have the majority, and what says goes.
So, at the end of the day, I think that both Missouri and California were definite good news stories in the
Surprising.
sea of bad news stories
I'm just saying.
as it relates to reproductive rights.
Usually Missouri is hold my beer and tries to like compete with Texas and Florida. So you know we still have porn. I'm just throwing that out there. Not that I know, but I'm just
For now, for now.
for now, from what I understand, because I haven't heard anybody bitch about it. So that's how I know. If my
Yeah.
wife's listening, I'm not. It's not me. Just throwing that out there. Jesus.
Well, I think that's it for legislation. You want to talk about POTUS and the executive orders over the week?
Yeah, let's do it. Go for it. You
All
got the
right.
lowdown on it. I don't.
President Biden has been working on the process of trying to get himself out of the White House.
You know
And he's
what?
lived there.
I almost brought up the crazy thing that we saw today, and I'm not. He's too busy with the weather machine.
Yeah. So
I can't. I can't. I
so
can't.
folks, the joke is that, I shouldn't
Jesus.
say it's a joke now.
God.
The Trump inauguration, if you haven't heard, Trump inauguration has been moved indoors. And by the time you hear this and listen to this podcast, the Trump inauguration will be occurring. But it has been moved indoors. And honestly, I was thinking to myself, the whack jobs on Twitter are going to absolutely blame President Biden for the cold weather that has caused this to get moved indoors. And no sooner had I thought that than I got a notification from X blaming Dark Brandon for using the weather machine to
Listen,
put
from
the inauguration indoors.
listen, from what I've been told all day is daddy's home. So he's your daddy. I definitely am not gonna call him daddy, but
Yep.
I've,
Yep.
I've seen
But
some twerking and some snow machines. I'm good. I'm done.
but beyond that, what I will say is that there is one last minute midnight session executive order that just came down, and that is President Biden, through his process of review and using his attorneys, has determined that there were enough states to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, thereby making the Equal Rights Amendment the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and he directed that it be entered into and be identified as law. Now, this is an executive order that cannot be overturned by President Donald Trump. And though it will likely see a large number of challenges to the Equal Rights Amendment, the fact of the matter is that we now have the 28th Amendment, which establishes equal rights for all individuals, regardless of sex, nationality, what have you. It is now in the Constitution. So should make it for an interesting next 4 years as it gets challenged and as laws are challenged on the basis of the legality that it makes them illegal and unconstitutional as a result of this 28th Amendment. So great news story. It's a great way for Biden to just walk out the door and be like, pieces. Like,
Mic
excuse me,
drop.
walk out the door and be like, deuces, I'm done, right? Like, Dark Brandon has struck for the final time.
Mic
But
drop.
great news story there. But beyond
Uh,
that, that is the end of the executive orders when it comes to the 46th president.
I mean, he's still got a couple days. He could throw out some more. Do I see that happening? No.
No, no.
No grenades. No. None of
Mm-mm.
those big bombs coming out.
Next week there is the presidential inauguration. We've talked about it in ad nauseum here, and we will be live for that. So starting at around 11:45, could go earlier now that it has been moved inside. So just keep your eyes on the social medias and the event, and we'll let you know when we go live. We will be live on YouTube, so you'll be able to see us there.
Not TikTok because everyone's gonna be bored. So come watch us instead. That's where we're gonna
Yep.
be at.
I mean, TikTok probably won't be there anymore.
Well, there is that last ditch effort where tr- Biden did leave it to where Trump could say, "Hey, let's extend it 90 days," because they did
Hmm.
have that one off that could happen, and Trump could sweep in and save it. He did leave him that, so you never know. But TikTok's dead.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. But with that, that's all we got for today. We covered a lot of ground, and we hope that you picked up some useful information about what's happening in politics right now.
Oh my fucking god! My bad. I dropped that ball. Jesus Christ! I'm sitting there nodding along.
Well, that's all we got for today.
Jesus Christ! I'm trying to be done today. It's been a long week.
You say that every week.
I know, but fuck. Even you were like, fuck this shit.
All right, folks, that's all we got for today. We covered a lot of ground, and we hope that you picked up some useful information about what is happening in politics right now.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Politics can be pretty wild sometimes, especially if you're at the House meetings. But we'll be back next week to help make sense of it all. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen.
And folks, we are a small grassroots show that's trying to make a difference. And we really need your help to keep going. Unlike the big media companies, we depend entirely on listeners like you. If you can spare a few dollars, please visit cranboxpolitics.com/buy me a cran. Every donation that you provide does help, no matter how small.
If you're enjoying the show, there are a few other ways that you can help us out. First, hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast from. It's totally free. Second, take a minute to leave us a review. It really helps other people find out about our show. And if you want to take a deep dive into politics, sign up for our weekly newsletter at crayonboxpolitics.com. We break down the big stories and share extra analysis we can fit into the show.
And and folks, I got another plug for you. We do have the Facebook group 64. That's kind of where we go to talk to our listeners, talk to our fans, get input for future episodes, get input for you want to hear about what's going on in politics today. So if you want to be part of the conversation instead of just being here listening or watching us jap our jaws, head on over to Facebook and join 64. We'd love to hear your thoughts and discuss the issues that matter to you.
Even just telling a friend about us makes a huge difference. We're building this community one listener at a time, and we couldn't do it without you.
All right, well, that's it for this episode of Cranbox Politics Weekly. I'm Carl.
I'm Avery.
And remember, stay informed
Stay engaged.
and always color outside the political lines.